Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Joellen Meckley, and I am the Executive Director for the American College Center for Special Needs and the American College Center for Women in Financial Services. We are today hosting the webcast entitled Multi-Generational Wealth Planning and the Impact for Black Families. We have a very esteemed panel of incredible professionals here to talk with you, and as well as that, I will be introducing our moderator, Gregg Greenberg. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Gregg Greenberg, who will be serving as our moderator today. Gregg joined InvestmentNews as a multimedia anchor and retirement and planning editor after spending the past 4 years as the GM of media at the C-Suite Network. Prior to these positions, Gregg was the lead anchor and personal finance writer at The Street for more than 13 years, where he interviewed CEOs, fund managers, professional athletes, entrepreneurs, and best-selling authors. He is about as highly qualified a person you can find to moderate a panel like this, so I'm going to leave it in his capable hands now.
Thank you, Joellen, and welcome again to the American College Center for Women in Financial Services webinar, where we will explore multi-generational wealth planning, as well as analyze the systemic barriers that impact many Black families' ability to build and sustain generational wealth. As we just said, I'm Gregg Greenberg from InvestmentNews, and I'm going to be leading this discussion. Also on the call are FinServe Network Ambassadors Centario Grier, Angie Ribuffo, Andrew Tudor, and Fatima T. Williams. Also on the call is Lindsay Lewis, Director and Chair of the American College Center for Women in Financial Services. Now let's get started by talking a bit about how the conversation around generational wealth has evolved in the Black community and the role financial professionals have played in that evolution. And I'm going to start off by asking Andrew, it feels like more Black families are focused on building for the next generation than ever, and understand they need help in doing it right, but hurdles remain. So in your view, what are some of the biggest barriers that come to mind?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Gregg. I think the biggest barrier, I think we would be remiss not to say the biggest barrier for wealth building in the Black community is still institutional racism for financial services in a lot of ways. And I recently shared my story on LinkedIn that I learned about, which was my parents in their quest to buy their first home and the barriers that they came up against. And to make that long story short, they made more than the loan. They had great credit and they had no debt. And they walked in for the home loan and were denied. And luckily, my father knew someone who worked at a nonprofit called Housing Opportunities Made Equal. And they sent an identical fact pattern white family in, and they were approved immediately. And this is 1986. And so this is not, 1940, 1830s. And that's the same home I was raised in. We turned that into a 4-family apartment building. That home's income helped send me to one of the top 5 high schools in Ohio. And then the equity from that home helped educate myself and both of my older brothers. And so that's one story in one city. But when you multiply that times 50 million Black folks, and then you multiply it across the different sections of the financial industry, when we think about home lending, but business lending, access to capital, when we talk about life insurance underwriting and different mortality tables, homeowners insurance, GI Bills, FHA, right? We start to see that there is a different landscape of financial services and financial experiences for Black folks historically, and that it still really exists to this day. The biggest ones we see today are really in the appraisal space, when we see homes being appraised for Black folks at 20, 30, 40% on the dollar of what their neighbors are getting. And so all of the other things we talk about, and I'm big on really focusing on what we can control. And my father's a coach, and so he's like, I'll fight the refs, right? You play the game. So that's really kind of the refs as an issue, but a lot of these other things are really symptoms of that. When we think about lack of trust, lack of representation from the advisors, and then the other experiences around whether clients have had the experience of growing wealth with financial institutions and passing it on. But I still think that biggest hurdle is, to this day, still racism inside of those financial institutions.
Okay, well, you mentioned trust. Let's take it a little bit further with Centario. So as a follow-up, how do we help clear those hurdles as financial professionals, knowing that in many cases, the Black families who need help may have a justified mistrust of the industry based on past negative experiences like the kinds that Andrew just discussed?
Great question, Greg, and happy to see everybody on today. I'm excited to have an awesome conversation. It's like I'm talking amongst family, so this is going to be good. To answer your question, Greg, number one is acknowledge that their feelings and their experiences are real. I think that's a very important thing. A lot of times it's easy, maybe not intentionally, but we can come across dismissive in some cases, right? So just approach the conversation with a level of understanding and a level of empathy. I think that goes a long way in our community because we're an emotional people, right? And humans are emotional, right? In general, but I would say we're probably a little more emotional than most, just because our experience in this country is different than most. So again, acknowledge those experiences and listen to their stories. And one of the things we always ask in our first appointment with a new prospect is, what are your expectations, right? Not only what are your expectations for this initial conversation, but what are your expectations of an advisor, right? Because they want to be heard, okay? And once they've expressed, here's what I need, number one, as an advisor, I know how to present the information in a way they can understand. I know what's important to them. For some people, it's communication. For some people, it may be education. For some people, it may come down to fees or product-specific questions. But you want to know what are the hot buttons that they need pushed to make this a good relationship and a good overall experience. And then once you know, just provide it.
So we're going to take that a little bit further as well, this topic of communication and opening the lines of communication, both between professionals and clients and within the families that you're currently serving. So Fatima, what are some of the hard conversations that come up when you're doing this kind of family planning? How do you create the space for your clients to have those tough talks with you? Because those conversations are very difficult.
They are, for sure. Thank you very much, Greg. So in dealing with some of the same, hurdles that Andrew and Centario spoke on, some of the harder conversations around the family planning and finances conversation are dealing with clients who have kind of decided to take those hurdles on or take these, overcome these by themselves in a silo, right? So getting into the family dynamic and how they view themselves in the family compared to their siblings, compared to their parents, their children, et cetera. Like being the person that has to tell them, right, as the financial professional, yes, your goal is in fact achievable, and it's going to require additional efforts of X, Y, and Z, or based on your current income, we're not able to achieve that goal in the time that we originally planned, but let's go back and re-strategize, right? So obviously our roles require that transparency, the empathy, as well as Centario said, but also transparency and guidance. And then when it comes to just creating that space for my clients to have those tough, talks, and providing those options and allowing them to talk through the alternative solutions presented is very important. So, they may have already considered the cons on why they shouldn't include a spouse or a cousin or a sibling into the conversation. But, presenting the pros, right, and allowing them to have an open discussion and consideration, hey, if we bring in your sibling to help shoulder mom's mortgage, it's going to allow for additional disposable income for you. Or if we bring your spouse into the debt elimination conversation, we might also be able to uncover some of their issues surrounding spending habits. So obviously we know that every client is different, and some will be far more transparent as long as you give them the capacity to speak and kind of, speak further. But everyone, is really, some clients are also waiting for you just to uncover or discover certain things by asking those questions. And some are willing to talk if you give them the space, but still listening and understanding the difference between those is for sure key.
And a lot of times the clients have no idea what to ask. So I'm going to address this one to Angie. Is there any advice for helping clients have productive conversations about wealth and retirement and finances when you're not around to help? So, we know in a lot of cases, a Black client may be the first in their family to ever work with a planner or advisor. I mean, we've seen those experiences. So not only is there a learning curve in that relationship, but the client may have very little experience having these talks at home in a way that really makes an impact. So could you comment on that, Angie?
Sure. Thanks, Greg. And welcome, everybody. The thing that I see the most and hear the most is the fact that, and this has been alluded to by my colleagues, is we got to find out their why, right? When they come in. So that's really the first step, is we've got to figure out what their why is. Why did they come in? What do they know? And then start to build on that. And as we build on that and give them more financial knowledge, the hope is that they're going to be more confident in what it is they're doing. So if they're confident in what they're doing financially, hopefully others will see that. Something that I think is really important is understanding what they know about money from their parents, from their grandparents, from their aunties, right? What's their money story? Because that also layers into how the client's money story was created. So if everything they heard was speaking directly like to what Andrew said, if they heard that story about not being able to get a loan, for instance, right? There is now an institutional bias against the mortgage lender. So when they come in and they sit down and say, I want to have buy a home, we have to peel back that onion. So as we do that then, and they get more comfortable with the information, they will hopefully have conversations with their families. And one of the ways that we can do that is, one, make that suggestion, right, to their family members, just be transparent with it. This is a conversation that maybe you should also have with your children, with the rest of your family, and help them maybe set up the agenda and the talking points that they're going to cover. So again, they feel comfortable in having those conversations. If they are amenable, you may want to even have them practice it with you. I'm your brother, I'm your child. So what would you say to me, right? Exactly. So that you can get them comfortable in that space, because many times they've never had this conversation, or the conversation has been muted because, again, of past perceptions, of the financial industry. So I think if you can get them to the point of, one, being confident in their knowledge, two, bringing it out right up front that they should probably have these conversations, and then setting them up so that they can be successful in that by practicing with them or giving them talking points, I think is really a way to get that started. But it all starts with trust, and it all starts with building on their why.
A quick follow-up, Angie, because I love that idea of practicing. When should an advisor maybe even join a client when speaking to a lender? How far should an advisor go in the relationship in terms of helping make these decisions and overcoming that mistrust?
A lot of it is going to be based on the needs of the client and the culture of where they are, the landscape of where they are. I can't say, blanketly that every lender is going to be comfortable with suddenly a client walks in with their financial advisor. But if we can arm them, right, with the potential objections that they may hear, or arm them with the potential questions that they should be asking the lender, so that they go in armed, right? So the lender can now say, okay, well, these people kind of know what they're talking about. They've got their finances in order. They're here to present it. And hopefully that'll, squash any of the objections that a lender may have. But that's the same for any of our affiliates, right? Whether it's an estate planning attorney, a mortgage lender, anyone along those lines, we have to be able to arm our clients with potential objections that they may hear.
All right, I'm going to turn this one to Andrew. No, we've heard the term money story a few times, and I guess that's a big part of what shapes our financial behavior. So what does that term mean to you, money story, Andrew? And why is it so important to understand the money story of your client before you even approach the conversation of multi-generational planning with them?
The money story is everything. The money story is their amalgamation of experiences with money a lot of times we break those down into three parts. One are your family's experiences. The second one would be cultural experiences, people outside of your family, but that may be close. That could be church or school or just in the surrounding area. And then the third one would be your personal lived experiences. And I'm sometimes shocked at how a family member passing comment from 2009 sticks with them to the point of where they feel comfortable putting money or not putting money, who they trust and who they wouldn't. So your money story is really all of your experiences with money. We also break down their money scripts as well. And those scripts usually fall into there's an assessment we use for money scripts, but it talks about money vigilance or money avoidance or certain inclinations that you may have. And we have a conversation before we give the financial plan of the first question we ask is, tell me how was money for you growing up? And the answer to that question really usually uncovers, and there's usually 4 or 5 more questions behind that. What did you learn from your parents that you want to repeat? What did you observe from them that you don't want to continue to do? And so you can learn, and also it helps us to not pigeonhole them, right? We can have we can judge a book by its cover as much as we try not to. And so if I learn about your story, you may be from a different side of the world or different side of the track than I may have expected. And I can, okay, well, let's talk in this area, right? Or if you have more experiences than I believe. But the money story really drives the why in a lot of ways. It can also really drive the fears that are unspoken, but that show up every time an event happens. So we try to uncover that.
It sounds like to me, I'm just going to go back to Andrew for a second, is that it's also really part of the know your customer rule, because a lot of times people are they're not that familiar with the facts and the figures, the quantitative, but the money story is qualitative, and you can get a kind of understanding of their risk tolerance, for example. Would you agree with that?
I do. It's really overall behavioral. I've heard, and I would say that financial behavior makes sense if you know their money story. So, and if you don't know the money story, you're really talking about a symptom, not a problem. And I won't tell long stories all the time, but I heard when I was growing up that my mother went with her aunt in the 80s during a bank run, savings and loans bank run, and that they stood there all day and she never got her money back. And, I looked it up, whether that's the story or not, that's the story that she knows, right? I looked it up, and what happened was they closed down all those banks that were Ohio regulated because they didn't have enough money to bolster them. So they did a 3-day bank holiday where no one could get their money back. That's true. Eventually they made those people whole, but that's not the version of the story that my mom knows. And so if you were to just say it is stupid to put your money in a mattress, you should put it in a bank where you get interest, without knowing that she stood in the code in 87 waiting for money to come that never came, then you really can't help her. And she really doesn't trust your opinion because you don't understand why she feels the way she feels.
So I'm going to send this one to Centario. So Andrew said his mother brought in his aunt during the savings and loan crisis in Ohio, which I remember. I'm that old, Andrew. So this brings up the question is, when is the right time and the right way to bring other members of a client's family into the planning conversation? Is that something you like to do from the start, or do you recommend easing into it? Because everyone in their family has, well, my brother-in-law, he made a whole lot of money shorting stocks during the tech bubble, or he made a whole lot of money in Bitcoin. That doesn't mean it's best for your mother. That might have been great for your aunt or your uncle. So Centario, could you address that?
Absolutely. And just for the record, Andrew tells the best stories. I don't know if you guys can tell. He is an excellent storyteller. So salute, my friend. Greg, to answer your question, yeah. So I'm a sports guy. I played sports all of my life, and now it's amazing seeing my sons get into it. But in sports, there's a saying, know your personnel, right? And that's a fancy way of saying you need to know, number one, the client themselves, and you need to understand the dynamics between that client and other members of their family, okay? Because ultimately what you're trying to do is penetrate into the family, and you've got to build trust not only with your particular client, but now if you want to talk to their aunt or their uncle, to Andrew's point, they may have a different money story or personal experience that's different from your client. So knowing as much as you can about that individual, whether that's geographically where they live, that's a big part of it. Of course, their age, marital status, I think is important to know. These are things I try to find out before even being introduced to the family, right? Occupation, all that kind of stuff. And so I'll tell you something else I kind of do, people laugh at me about this. I will go online. Everyone has social media. I'll go online and try to see what I can learn about an individual based on their LinkedIn or their Facebook, even their Instagram. That'll tell you a lot about an individual, and you'll start to be able to piece together some of their money story even before you talk to the individual. Now, you always want to ask questions to get clarity before you truly make assumptions, but you can still learn a lot about someone. So again, for me, it's let's get to know as much about that individual as you can beforehand, and then ask your client, what do you think is the best way to introduce me? Okay. And once that introduction is made, you now at the family member that you've met, what are your expectations? What has been your money story? You literally go down the same path. What I've seen happen, which is pretty cool, is when my clients almost vet and interview the individual they're introducing me to and their family better than I do, because they've been through the experience and the process with me. So they already know what I'm looking for, and they now go and vet the client and prepare their mom or their uncle. They prepare them to meet me, and it's such a much more receptive situation. And then the walls come down. I think Andrew used the word fear earlier. Some of the fear begins to go away, and you can really address, what their concerns are, what their goals and objectives are.
One follow-up, and then we're going to go to Fatima, is we're talking about multi-generational wealth planning. And my money story is that I had no idea how much my dad made. He really didn't bring me into any of the money conversations until, frankly, until right near where he passed away. So my question to you, Centario, is when do you start really bringing in the kids? Because you mentioned kids. When do you start letting them know, well, this is how much money I make, or how much money I have, or this is my intentions, what to leave to you? How do you address these questions with the kids?
That's a really, really good question. And so again, here's where just understanding the family dynamics is very, very important. But I would say the moment you and that client have, let's assume I'm talking to a 65-year-old individual, right? And let's say their children are in their mid to late 30s, okay? I'm going to, once I've done everything I need to do with that client, and now they're ready to introduce me to the children, I think it's very important that upon that first introduction, let the children know, listen, guys, I'm a facilitator, right? This is something that's very important to your mom and to your dad, or to whomever, right? This is very important to them. They've built X, Y, and Z. You have an opportunity as a family to do something that most people in our community do not have the opportunity to do, right? And quite frankly, we can't afford to blow it, right? Literally and figuratively, we cannot afford to blow this opportunity. So I say the moment the client is willing to introduce you to their children, that's when I like to go in and get to know them. And again, depending on the age, I can start to understand how to communicate to them, what are some of their hot buttons, where they are in their phase of life. If someone is 25 years old, they have a totally different perception and really priority than someone that's 45 years old, right? It's going to be a lot different. So as soon as possible is my answer. And again, know your personnel before going in.
All right, now this is for Fatima along the same lines. Is it ever too
Greg,
late
before, Greg, this is Angie. And I just
Absolutely.
want to tag on for a minute on to what Centario said. I think that if you start having conversations if our clients start having conversations with the children at the youngest age possible, we can start financial literacy at the very young age. And again, knowing, we now know the client's money story. We've been able to peel back that onion, right? But we don't know what impression was left on that child at the early age, right? So, I'll share a story. My mom never talked about money with me ever. Don't worry about it. We've got it covered. It's all good. So one day my son in middle school came home and said, "Mom, are we poor?" And I said, "Why would you ask that question?" "No, we're okay." "Well, you never tell us anything about money. You tell us it's covered, it's okay." And I was having a conversation at school with my friends. Now, this is middle school, mind you, and everybody was talking about money. And I said, "No, we don't talk about money." And they said to me, my son, "Then you must be poor." So in his mind, not talking about money meant that we didn't have any, right? That was the beginning of that money story. And had he not brought it up, he could have gone through his entire life thinking that people who don't talk about money are poor. So I'm not going to go somewhere and talk about money if I don't think that I'm wealthy enough to be able to have a conversation with a financial advisor. So again, we're going back to, as Centario said, sooner is better, and really getting to understand even a child's money story becomes important. Thank you for letting me jump in.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's a wonderful anecdote. And so I am going to go to Fatima now. So Fatima, is it ever too late to start planning with the previous, current, and future generations in mind? And what happens if a family feels like they made too many mistakes and they can't catch up?
So the easiest answer is no, it's never too late to devise some type of financial strategy. I am very certain that working with, a financial professional will provide even more clarity on what level of intention might be achievable based on the budget, the time horizon, the specificity. But the hardest conversations in planning for some of the previous generations is sometimes that there's a lot of urgency. The sense of urgency is very much there when you're talking to someone who's trying to plan for a parent or an elder. And they want to kind of throw all of their effort, all their assets towards this thing because they realize that this window is closing fairly aggressively. And so, the client, feels that some clients have felt that they have, certainly taken some missteps previously, but a lot of times, again, sitting down with a professional, you can find that clarity in that way. But I don't think it's ever too late, but I think obviously our goal as professionals is to help you get to where you want to be. And so sometimes that means amending or creating a brand new path to get you there.
So, follow up, you said that sometimes clients are anxious, but maybe they're not going to have enough money to retire when they want or pay for that wedding. How do you walk them off the ledge? Because what you just described is clients are being very anxious, and it's your job as the financial advisor is not to promise them everything and saying, well, you can certainly pay for that $200,000 wedding or graduate school as well, if we buy, crypto and really kind of lever up your portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you walk them back and say, okay, let's put our thinking caps on and not get upset. Let's devise a plan. So talk about getting your client off that ledge, if you don't mind, Fatima.
Getting them off the ledge is 100% being able to speak this language, right? So all of us are able to speak money at some level and look at what they have and interpret what they have to them in plain terms. I think that sometimes if you like the water cooler conversation around people who are investing into employer retirement plan is I'm investing, I'm maxing it out. Well, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to somebody else? And what does that mean to your goals, right? So aligning the goals or taking the short, mid, and long-term goals and lining them up next to what we currently have working for you and what you want to do. And again, taking all of these things and putting them into the proverbial bowl and mixing them up and figuring out what works and how we're going to create this cake for you, this plan, this whatever for you that works for your future. Being able to understand, and so walking someone off the ledge is giving them an understanding on their level and not using acronyms and words that they don't understand, that will still make them walk away scratching their head like, I'm investing in my 401k. What's the problem? I'm putting money here. What I don't understand. She's still or he's still not talking to me the way I feel assured, right? So the assurance comes in understanding, and even sometimes education, but also being realistic about the priorities that they have. Sometimes they mirror ours and sometimes they don't, but the priorities that they have and what the assets and the ability they have within those and how they work together.
So the big goal, as you just mentioned, Fatima, for most Americans is retirement, and whatever's left over goes into that multi-generational planning. So let's get to retirement. I want to get there as quickly as possible because a lot of people don't think they're ever going to get there. So my question for Angie is, how do you address that pessimistic mindset as a financial professional and getting Black families to believe in the dream of retirement, believe that they can retirement? So, what life cycle and lifestyle conversations do you have with them?
That's a really good question, because there is, as we've all kind of alluded to and talked about, a cultural difference here in our Black African American community. So we have to dissect and define first, right? What is retirement? Like, what is that? Because, when you're thinking about retirement, somebody said to me once, well, I don't want to sit on my porch and eat bonbons and watch game shows, right? Because that in their mind was how they viewed retirement. So we have to first know what retirement looks like. What are you talking about? And then talk about how they can provide, how we can help them provide solutions potentially to that retirement question by knowing exactly what it is they want to do. If they want to travel, if they want to provide education for their children, we have to have that conversation. They have to understand that they are in control of their story, of their financial story, and therefore they can make those changes, right? Whatever those changes are. So walking through that and helping them see what retirement is. Retirement is not a straight line. You don't go into retirement. This is one of those things where we hear quite often, well, when I go into retirement, I'll be making less money. Well, yeah, you're in retirement, so you're probably not making any money, right? You're living off of what you've put aside, unless you're going to go get another job, right? They need to understand that. It's not making money, it's using the money that you have available to you. And what does that look like? Because retirement's not a straight line. I always say there's the go-go years of retirement when you're out there and you're doing all the things you want to do. Then there's the slow-go retirement where you're starting to slow down a little bit, whether it's because of age or because of medical issues, right? And then there's the no-go time when you're really maybe sitting on the rocking chair eating bonbons. So, those are the life cycles of retirement, and they need to understand how they're going to walk through that and look at it from that life cycle rather than I'm going to start retirement at this age and then I'm going to die at this age and the money is going to work this way, because there are too many components in there that they don't consider. Taxes, right? Healthcare, right? Medicare premiums, how does all those things work? So if we can break it down for them and make it manageable, bite-sized pieces, right? I always say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So retirement is one bite at a time. Don't look at it as the big elephant or it's overwhelming. So helping them break down those pieces, both by life cycle and by, what it is that they want to do, I think will help them see that retirement is possible. And if it's not possible, then how much of it, or what are the other options that you need to do in now while you can to maybe fill in some of those gaps?
You piggybacked off of one of Andrew's questions, so I'm going to throw this over to Andrew. Andrew, when you discuss retirement with your clients, how optimistic or pessimistic are they in general? And for the pessimistic ones, how do you lead them through to understand that it is possible to retire? And maybe even leave some money left over for future generations?
One of the funniest things in this industry is that sometimes the most well-prepared ones are pessimistic, and sometimes the least prepared ones are most optimistic. There's really, in my experience, no correlation between confidence and preparedness sometimes. And so let's run the numbers, right? Let's figure out if what you would like to happen, you're on track for, and it's possible in the current parameter. And then sometimes the conversation is tough. There are tough conversations to be had. I'm getting better and better at having those each day because I have a lot of empathy, and I can only imagine what it's like to get to what you expect to be the retirement years. And mathematically, it just isn't possible today. And so I think optimism or hope, better than optimism, hope can come from reality in some cases. And in a lot of times, if we have clients, back to money scripts, that are money avoidant, this may be the first time they've logged into their 401k in years, right? This may be the first time that they've pulled all of these pieces together to even look at them. And so sometimes the answer is, it wasn't nearly as bad as you thought when you walked in. I love those meetings. And then sometimes the answer is, it's a little worse than you thought. But here are what we see as some of the scenarios that give you dignity, that allow you to make the impacts that you wanted to make, maybe at a smaller amount, but we can still give to this organization. It just may be 3,000 instead of 50,000 at the end of life. So I think the numbers really give us a way of giving them true answers over hopes.
So it's mixing the money story, the qualitative with the quantitative of actually opening up the books. I want to jump here to Centario for a second, because he was talking about kids and he was talking about athletics. And what we're talking about when we're talking about looking towards retirement is goals-based investing, I think at its core. And paying for college is a big goal for a lot of people. And people have to say, well, do I fund my retirement or do I pay for my kids' college? And this it's a conflict for a lot of families. And I have a lot of friends who they're pushing their kids to play athletics because they think their kids are going to get scholarships. And not every kid gets a scholarship. They think their kid might be better than the kid actually is. So Centario, if you don't mind just commenting on the conflict between saving for retirement and paying for college and trying to get everyone's their parameters, their ideas straight so they can actually accomplish those goals and not drive themselves crazy, for lack of a better term.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that comes up all the time. Most of our clients between the age of 35 and 50 years old. So they're right in that window where they either have children, their children are newborns, or they're in that middle school to high school range. And that's where the clock really starts to tick. And they really can see college expenses 2, 3, 4 years out, right? One of the things I tell folks right off the bat is there are loans for college, right? There are not loans for retirement. That does not exist, right? And so I'm not going to force someone to choose between their retirement and their children's education. But I think again, we keep saying the same word, but it goes back to their money story. Why is it so important that you pay for your children's college? Why is that so important to you? You'll be surprised what you hear, right? It could be, well, I had student loans out the wazoo, and that's the last thing I want to my children to have to endure, right? So on and so forth. So, or sometimes it really is a keeping up with the Joneses. That is a real thing because again, our relationship with money is a little different. As a community, we generally like to show how much money we have, right? We like to show it. And so sometimes keeping up with the Joneses can be a serious issue. But for me, I take a holistic approach. We look at your entire balance sheet. I think that also helps the client because it's one thing to set a goal, but it's hard to show someone how realistic or unrealistic a goal is until you take score, right? Clients don't know how to take score. That's why they come to us. So if we look at your balance sheet, here's your assets, here's your liabilities, here's your net worth. Now let's just assume you continue doing the exact same things you're doing, the exact same savings programs, the interest on your debt, inflation, all the above. Let's project out into the future. How realistic is it that you can pay for college at this rate, because some people might not want to pay 100% of their children's tuition, but let's say 75 or 50%, whatever the number is. How realistic is it that you can do that? And how does it now impact your retirement picture, right? So it starts with, here's where you are today. Let's project into the future. Is this possible? And it is, sometimes it's a very difficult conversation. I'm finding a lot of the higher income earners, their children are in private school, even in elementary, middle, and high school. That is a very, that can be more expensive than college in a lot of cases. So sometimes it's not negotiable, and you just have to, as the advisor, know which buttons to push and which battles not to fight. As a married man, I know which battles not to fight sometimes. So if you know there's not a battle to fight, okay, what are we willing to sacrifice or adjust to make this a possibility? All right. Because at the end of the day, and my business partner, I love him for this, but he said, retirement is a luxury item. So you're going to pay for luxury. Luxury does not come cheap. So if you want to make the sacrifice to pay for your children's college, that's fine. What else are we going to have to sacrifice? Is it one vacation a year, right? Is it one less birthday celebration or cookout? Is it less Christmas gifts? What are we going to trade off to still be able to accomplish the things that you have prioritized higher on the list?
I'm just going to throw it over to Fatima because it's really been great speaking about goals-based investing. Fatima, do you have any thoughts on saving for retirement, saving for college, saving for a car, or saving for a wedding? Maybe even a story that's come up that's been triggered by what we've been discussing?
So, I mean, in general, yes, do all of it, right? No, that's the easiest way to put it. I know that depending on who I've spoken to and the age, all of these topics are fantastic. So, buying the home, I think sometimes we put, in the spirit of keeping up with the Joneses, we have placed something that could be a long-term goal in a mid or short-term bucket. And that is one of the in that conversation, it's not easy to have, but it's also, it makes it a little bit easier to say that this is still achievable. Let's push that down a scotch and let's reset, right? And I think I got a chance to speak to a number of people in their 20s to 40s, a very recent panel conversation. And it was really about how young people living in New York in the African-American market are dealing with the cost of living in New York and also trying to live their best life in that same spirit. And I think the hardest conversation was like, well, do you want your best life today or do you want your best life in the future? Because you can have it today and we can pretend that, it's only about living in the moment and whatever other favorite songs on the radio that tells you to do that right now, and that works. But there's some harsh realities to what happens when you pour all of your money into today and not necessarily plan for later. I do have a family friend who dealt with some family members after her father's passing, and there was, I think, a higher expectation that her father was going to have some assets for the family, his siblings, his nieces and nephews. And there was a very large shock across the family when they realized that there wasn't even any baseline protection in place, right? But because of his personal community and the unit around him, they made sure that he was taken care of in his passing. But as far as like leaving this legacy and the multi-generational planning, there wasn't any. And so that was a tough conversation because of the expectations of the family, because he was the first six-figure earner. But if you look back at the receipts, all of his six-figure earnings went towards their needs because they didn't have the same mindset that he had when it came to how he used his money. He was very comfortable. He lived a very low maintenance life on a financial level. He wasn't on a high required, like financial city, like a New York, for example. He was in, a suburban area, but he didn't have the ability he didn't have the capacity to actually put money away for future family, children, even, siblings, et cetera, because a lot of the assets that he had, he used in the moment. And it wasn't even for his own benefit. It was really to help his siblings. And because they weren't pulling in the income that he was pulling in. And so everyone kind of started from scratch when he passed away. And that was a learning experience for every single one of them. But I am able to learn from that, being as close as I am to that person, to my friend, and just learning and hearing her be resilient regardless. But I think that is we've talked about this before. Resiliency is an exhausting keyword, because as a culture, as a community, we want to be resilient. There's a lot of things that we've taken on our back, and we thank God we have been able to be resilient from. But there's other things like learning about money, like learning how to save and passing on generational wealth, that at some point we don't want to have to be, I don't want to have to get it out the mud every single generation. I don't want to have to learn over again and start from scratch. We should not have to go through that. And so some of this conversation about planning is more about, it's not just the generational wealth itself, the asset itself that should be generational, but the mindset to begin to save for the next generation is also something that should be generational. And I think that is maybe some of the education that's lost or not necessarily enforced beyond, we're going to pass this money down, but actually letting the next generation and even the future, the past generations know, hey, we're etching out a process, a system in this family going forward so that there will never be what was. And we want you to understand that there's going to be a Christmas that's going to be we're going to be short this year. It's only going to be a stockings. It's not going to be the big tree. It's not going to be the big trip, but it's also going to be better for all of us in the future. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to go to Andrew quickly because we have about 10 minutes left, but I just want to get Andrew's view. We've talked a whole lot about retirement. We've talked about college. One thing we're seeing is that after the COVID crisis, people really did want to keep up with the Joneses. They wanted to go spending. They wanted to go on trips. And now what we're seeing now is credit card debt really rise up. And Fatima just talked about getting stuck in the mud, and credit cards really get you stuck in the mud. So Andrew, how do you get your clients to kind of know when it's time to stop spending? Because I think credit card debt might be a problem because people were having so much fun and are having so much fun post-pandemic, and those bills are going to come due soon.
Yeah. I want to answer that question. There's a thing that Fatima talked about around boundary setting with family. That is a skill set that is rarely taught, but you need it as soon as you start making good money. And so one of the things that we can do and should do as advisors is teach our clients how to set boundaries with family. There was a question in the chat also around sharing with your kids and, not wanting them to come to the bank of mom and dad if you tell them what your estate or what your plans look like. And that's a wonderful opportunity to set a boundary, to explain the purpose of the dollars, and to let them know that the money's there and know that they need to go make their own way in the world. So I think those things are a big deal. Coming back to the credit card question, credit card rates have inflated like crazy, right? Rates have gone up across the board, but credit card rates have gone up to exorbitant levels. And yes, if you sit a group of people down for 3 years and tell them they can't go outside, they can't eat, and they can't travel, and then you give them a 2-year window where you can do whatever you want, yeah, people are going to do whatever they want. And they had extra money to do it. But when you went from using savings to do it to using credit cards to do it, that's really where we find issue. So, when we meet with clients and they say, I saved this much a month, and we're like, great. And we bring in all their balances and they've got $15,000 on credit cards. You're like, well, there's only one way that you have credit card balances. You made good money and you spent good money and then some, right? And so, there's emergencies that happen. There's reasons that you might need to do that temporarily. But before we invest, because none of the investments I'm going to recommend are going to match this 30% Amex rate. So before we invest, and don't tell me about the points that you got, because I love sitting down to calculate the value of the flight and and how much you paid in interest. And people are shocked when they learn how much they paid for the flight, right? So, but changing habits are very difficult, especially when everyone around me is now inviting me to this trip and this brunch and that family vacation. So in The Millionaire Next Door, they talked about one of the things that you have to have as you build wealth as a trait is social indifference. You have to be able to say no. You have to be able to stand out from the other people around you. And we arm our clients by telling them, I know what it looks like out there. I'm out there too. But in real life, I'm sitting down with these people and it's a lot of broke folks running around. So we don't want you to be one of those people.
And it gets even harder with social media because everyone's showing you their vacations. You know, they're not showing you the credit card debt it took to take them. Now I want to go to Angie because we got about 7 minutes left. So Angie, as we approach Women's History Month, let's talk about Black women and their trust in financial services. According to the initial Black Women Trust in the Financial Services Industry Study, 3 in 5 Black women express difficulty in finding financial professionals or advisors they trust. How can financial professionals build deeper relationships with their female clients and educate the society at large?
Thank you for that. Yes, Women's History Month next month, March, just around the corner. What I have found that women clients who come to me, the reason that they come to me is because if they had a financial advisor, let's say, and with a spouse or a partner and that partner died, they never felt heard. So they left that advisor and they come over to someone else. They want to be heard. They want to be able to have a voice in the conversation. And many times it comes down to a peppering of questions. You know, what do you have? So sometimes you have to put a question out there and then be silent and go into active listening mode, right? Because then you can mirror back what you heard them say, and then they understand that they've been heard. One of my sayings that I say to young advisors is, he who speaks first loses. So once you've put it out there, if you then talk over them or try to get your point across to them on what they're saying, you don't have the time to hear what they're saying, right? So that's a trust building exercise. We so want to tell them what we know to make them feel comfortable that it's the complete opposite of that they now sit back. And earlier on, we talked about behavioral finance. That is really important when it comes to working with Black women, right? Because they are very telling. If you see them sit back in their chair, they are out, right? They don't want to, yeah, Andrew's laughing, but that's true. They sit back in their chair, they might as well fold their arms and wait for the clock to tick down to that hour mark and leave, because they're telling you, you haven't heard them. You need to key in on that. Key in on not just what they're saying, but also how they're reacting to what you're doing. And by doing that, you let them know, one, that you've been heard. 2, you can now begin to peel back that onion a little bit more to understand them, right? You know, what are their priorities? And their priorities may be something that you never even thought of. I mean, we typically hear that they want to, and the study shows that they want to clear debt as a short-term goal, right? That's their short-term goal. Okay, well, we need to address that up front, right? We can't put that on the back burner because, you know, they have investable assets and we want to bring those assets over and we want to be able to tell them that. Yeah, no, they don't care about that this moment in time. You can bring it up and say later on, we're going to have this discussion. But again, it goes back to active listening, having that conversation to build trust and build that foundation from the beginning. And you can only do that, I believe, through active listening and being able to have a conversation with them. It's not a Q&A, it's a conversation. Yeah. Just be authentic. Be authentic in it.
And then the final question, we're going to bring this in on time, is to Fatima. So can you just wrap it all up for us? Why does all this matter so much? Can you just speak to the importance of addressing the wealth gaps in our country and the power and the responsibility, if you will, of financial professionals like yourself to try and close them and across different eras, so you know our kids can have some money?
For sure. So financial professionals, as a whole, we have a responsibility to not only provide recommendations specific to our clients, but to also empathize with the cultural market barriers that our clients are dealing with and educate them on how to overcome them and power through them. And being, the first in your family, for example, it could mean the potential loss obviously is even greater. We talked about that as well. And also the ability to replicate that same, success as a six-figure earner or as, the first whatever, status in the family is there's no process in place on how to do that again, right? You're the first to do it. So everyone's looking at you to teach them how to do that. And so with that, we have the power to be a part of these dreams that are realized and an integral part of the doors that are opening for these people, for our clients. And, for many who don't believe it, they never believed it would have been possible for them previously. So, they look to us for guidance and responsibility and even ways to give back to our communities. And I think that's what will make the difference, as long as, again, speaking back to being able to listen first, but also provide guidance and being responsible on their behalf as well.
That's a tremendous way to wrap up. So personally, I got so much out of this conversation. It's amazing. I want to thank the American College Center for Women in Financial Services for just asking me to host this webinar, because I've learned a tremendous amount. I want to thank our FinServe Network Ambassadors, Centario Grier, Angie Ribuffo, Andrew Tudor, and Fatima Williams. Thanks also to Lindsay Lewis, the Director and Chair of the American College Center for Women in Financial Services. I'm just going to turn it over quickly back to Joellen, because I'm sure I forgot a few things. But once again, thanks to everyone for coming, and thanks to our panelists.
First, we wanted to give you 2 different QR codes that you can utilize if you're interested in learning more. If you would like to learn more about what the Center for Women in Financial Services is doing at the American College to advance women in the profession, you can either go to our website, theamericancollege.edu/women, or you can use the QR code you see on the QR code you can see on the screen. And as well, the FinServe network, of which these 4 individuals are part of. All of the folks who serve in our network are, as we put it, a select group of doers, different makers, alums, and members who advocate for the college and its programs, and just help us get the word out in the hopes of continuing to benefit society as much as we can. So you can go to the website for that or use that QR code as well. Thank you so much for attending. For the folks who sat on the panel today, as Gregg said, absolutely outstanding, incredibly informative. Thank you for your contribution.
Expand your opportunities at theamericancollege.edu.